There we are. That should be recording now. I'll just stop sharing the Welsh translation options there as well. There we go.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Good afternoon and welcome to this virtual meeting of the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee Overview and Scrutiny Subcommittee. Please ensure your phones are switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. In addition, when asked to raise your hand, could you raise your electronic hand? Yeah, and welcome to this session. Item 2 on the agenda, are there any declarations of interest? So if members have declarations in relation to any reports in today's agenda, can you please indicate now? Can't see any. So we're going to head straight into agenda item 3 then. Regional Transport Plan, Case for Change. In this item, Stuart Davis and Dave Griffiths are attending, and hopefully I think they're going to be presenting a short presentation for the paper, and then we can take questions afterwards, hopefully, please.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks. What I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in Lee White, if that's okay. Now, Lee's been brought in to assist with the development of the regional transport plan for the behalf of the region. So brought in to bring some specialism, some capacity to help us sort of guide us through what we need to do. So Lee's been involved in pulling the implementation, the case for change, sorry, together on this one. So it's all right with you. I'll just hand over for Lee to give a kind of a brief overview to the report. Thank you.
Yeah, that's perfect, Stuart. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Chair. Some colleagues may have heard this speech a number of times before, so do bear with me. The case for change is obviously one of the key documents in developing the regional transport plan. Clearly, there's challenges around the region following Neath and getting a transport strategy in place that actually meets the current Welsh Government thinking. So the case for change is a key step along the way, and effectively there's two parts to this. One is effectively a state of the nation piece that sets out where the transport network is at the moment, and also trying to understand where the transport network is, probably, I won't say holding the region back, but actually it needs to, this transport network needs to evolve to actually allow the region to function as we would see fit. And that leads into the second part, which is actually a description of why we believe change is essential. Now, obviously, that comes in many parts, and the detailed technical work will emerge downstream in terms of what that may look like, what that means in the terms of the policy space, what that means in terms of infrastructure schemes and other schemes as well. So this really is effectively a first piece of gap analysis, for want of a better description, that actually sets out where we are now, what's missing and what's missing. I think that's probably in the simplest terms. The other component of the case for change is actually setting out in very headline terms how we intend to engage with stakeholders and indeed the wider public. Clearly, when we get the RTP together, it's got to be subject to formal public consultation and then an integrated impact assessment. So it leads us through that process of engaging with stakeholders, briefing the stakeholders, establishing the vision of the regional transport plan, and then actually trying to turn that into reality. So we're ready for that public consultation exercise to inform the final versions and, say, the impact assessments that we need to make. So I think that's about it, Chair, in terms of an introduction. Obviously, Stuart, I think there's some comments in your covering report about finance and the way forward, isn't there, as well? So it's probably back to you now, if that's amenable to yourself, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. That's thank you for that introduction, Lee.
That's great. Yeah, I guess the two things in terms of the finance, we've had 125,000 of funding confirmed from Welsh Government for the current financial year. So we're currently looking at how we achieve this sort of spend and get as much delivered as possible in terms of for this financial year. There isn't the ability to carry the money over, so we're looking at how that's most effectively spent. And then next year we've had 100,000 funding towards it. it's clear from the sort of initial scoping that the costs will go above that for the development. And that's something that we've started, that we've been sort of in discussion really with Welsh Government along the way, is to seek additional funding for it, and we'll continue to press the case for that one. And the other thing, which being in the same danger of sounding like a stuck record, but the timescales are extremely ambitious in terms of delivery at present. With sort of next spring for a kind of completion. There's an awful lot of work to do between now and then, and we have raised concerns over that, and we'll continue to do so. With following the kind of case for change, we'll sort of map out what we think is a kind of more realistic timescale, or what could be delivered in that time for consideration from Welsh Government, from officers and from members. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Should we just go into questions now? Then I think that I'm aware of several members who'd like to ask questions this afternoon. First one being Councillor Black. I see your hands raised, so let's come in now.
Thanks, Chair. Stuart, I understand what you just said correctly. We've got 6 weeks to spend £125,000.
Sorry, in terms of we've started in terms of some of the spend already. There is flexibility in terms of what the monies could be spent on. What we're looking at the moment is that we may have undertaken some works for things like the metro, the development of some of the metro proposals, some of the studies and things there. So we're looking at whether it's appropriate for some of this RTP funding to replace the metro spend, and then the metro spend be carried over to be brought back in for next year for the development. So yeah, I mean, we can spend money sort of fairly effectively, but it would be ambitious to get everything commissioned and done in that timescale, as you point out, Peter. That's certainly a bit too ambitious to get everything from that. So we're looking at how we can. There will be costs anyway that we've accrued over the last sort of few months on it, which we put to place on there.
And in terms of developing this plan, what do you think the final cost is going to be?
The outline indicative cost that we had, and this is based sort of very loosely on the I guess the last iteration, but we were considering it to be circa possibly just a little bit less than about 400,000 in total. It depends on, as I say, a number of different things, the studies that are required, the level of consultation, the timescale and for developing it really. But that was a sort of a kind of a ballpark figure which was being worked around.
Okay. The other question I had was relating to the reference in the document to electric vehicles. I mean, you've got a lot of maps here showing levels of deprivation, and also overlaying levels of pollution, etc. So clearly the solution proposed by the scoping document is we're looking to try to tackle levels of pollution by introducing electric vehicles as wide as possible. But of course, electric vehicles cost a lot more than your internal combustion vehicle, and of course, so a lot of people will not be able to afford them. And in urban areas, particular, there is no charging mechanisms available. I live in a terrace property. I can't have an electric vehicle. I can't run a cable across the pavements, so I'm just wondering, what is the infrastructure that's going to be like in terms of this, and how are we going to be dealing with that particular problem? If we're going to our ambition is to have a pollution-free transport system where private vehicles do not add to that pollution, then how do we achieve that with those circumstances?
I certainly won't be able to answer give you a response to the exact way forward now. What I would say is that the principle, I guess, of the RTP and the fluid, but now with the guidance which it's hinged around, is the sort of the transport hierarchy. So very much that although private vehicles are in there, they are lower down. Electric vehicles are above other sort of low emission vehicles, but the hierarchy is to sort of focus on the kind of cycling, walking, public transport, the sort of to try and make it as effectively as possible for those. obviously bearing in mind there are challenges with the the mixed sort of rurality and things of the region, which has been flagged up in the case for change. But it is a challenge looking at how the infrastructure will be provided. So it's part of the work which has been underway as part of development of the metro proposals, and will be considered as part of the wider RTP, and using the RTP as a bid document for leveraging funding for delivering the sort of transport interventions. So not an answer directly to your question in there, but certainly we're aware of the challenge. But I'm conscious there may be other colleagues that I know Darren has his hand up, so whether Darren, Chair, sorry, subject to you, but there may be other colleagues who want to help with a more detailed answer as well.
Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine. Come on in.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Councillor Black. Just to add really to what Stuart was saying there, we've already been looking at we have already produced a ULEF strategy, ultra low emission vehicle strategy, which will feed into the RTP work as well. And the points you make there are very fair. I suppose the concentration of thinking at the moment has been probably on more of the easy hanging fruit in terms of converting our own fleet and the implications of that. And that's going to make a significant step change as well, of course. But you're absolutely right that that thinking, that ambition needs to be extended. Coupled with that, we've also been looking at technology, perhaps not so much in the regional sense, but certainly as technical officers, more on an all-Wales sense in some of the engineering work coordination that we do, looking at on-street charging and how do we do that, and receiving ideas and proposals for on-street charging, so charging posts on streets, a bit like you see in London. How does that work? All of those sorts of arrangements. So all of that's got to feed into things. So I hope that helps a little bit further. And just to go back to the plan production and the costing side of it, just to note that one of the items of feedback that TfW have given us around the costing side of it and the plan production is that we didn't have TfW to help us when we did the previous iteration of the plan, and they are there and suggesting that they will be able to take up some of the strain, particularly in things like some of the transport study work and other supporting work into the plan. Now, we're not totally clear how that is going to work in the round, because obviously we're just at the early stages of the plan, but just to note that there are some other strands of work that TfW should be able to support us on to take the pressure off us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm sure that they will come back to this. Of course, you're not going to be able to phase out private vehicles, I'm afraid, but we'll see. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Black, and thank you, Darren. Can I just ask a follow-up question before I bring anyone else in? You mentioned the low-hanging fruit and changing your fleet vehicles over. Have you looked into the charging overnight, overnight charging and the lower tariffs that you could access if you were to do that, as opposed to using charging, like the charging units which are more expensive? Is that, maybe putting that in, is that something that you've considered, Darren?
Chair, thanks. In Pembrokeshire, not directly. We are in the middle of producing our fleet transition strategy, but I am aware, looking at Dave's got his hand up, I think NPT are a bit further down the road, pardon the pun, so it may be that he might want to come in as well and give some further feedback on that one. But from what you're saying is something we want to look at. It's just that in Pembrokeshire, we have been looking more at hydrogen rather than electric, you see. So having said that, we'll be beginning to look back towards electric as well, the smaller fleet and things like that, particularly. Thanks.
Okay. I'd say, given that there's only 300 hydrogen cars in the UK and there's 1 million EVs, that's probably a good idea to look towards EVs. Good thinking there. Great. Thank you. David, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to add, and Darren covered off that there is a EV strategic plan for the region, but just to add to the to partially answer Councillor Black's query, Welsh Government and TfW are carrying out some pilots with local authority in Wales, and I know they are progressing with Newport and Caerphilly to pilot different options of on-street charging. so Darren mentioned maybe as part of lighting columns or pillars on street, overhead charging from residential properties, and in fact charging facilities that would be trunked through pavements. So they're actually undertaking that piece of work as we speak. From that pilot, we'll be better informed as to what options we may be able to maybe roll out in across Wales, but it would also standardise specification, insurance, liabilities, and highways policy around the implementation of those sort of options for EV charging for private property. The other thing to add was in terms of sort of fleet vehicles, the Welsh Government Energy Service have done a number of studies, I think pretty much across every local authority in Wales, to inform not only the fleet transition, but grey fleet as well within authorities and public bodies, with a view to setting out some of the high level strategic infrastructure requirements to support the transition. The other aspects are, of course, perhaps in terms of public bodies, is how they can support that with home charging with employees, the provision of potentially EV sacrifice schemes for car purchase. And in terms of, I think you mentioned nighttime charging. Most people, I think, would benefit where they can charge at home on a nighttime tariff. But in terms of our own fleet, we would be predominantly charging overnight, but depending upon the types of vehicles, you may need to have charges during the day as well. Now, I don't want to prolong it too long, but there are benefits whereby if you've got a solar infrastructure that goes with that charging facility, that can also be offset to supply power to the buildings during the day and vehicles by night. So it's a bit of a win-win in trying to reduce energy consumption by local authorities. So yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. I think that's a really good. Thank you for your patience, Councillor Tierney and Howlett. I'll bring you in next. But I think that's a really interesting point about the solar panels and actually integrating the whole system so that we can have facilities generating electricity, and then that can be used to feed the fleet vehicles during the day. I think that's a really important point, and thank you for making it, David. Very, very helpful. Okay, Councillor Tierney, thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Russ. I'm probably going to be a little bit parochial when it comes to Pembrokeshire in this report, but if it is a document that kind of lays out the land, I think we've got to be a bit clear where there are a few gaps in this report. So there's no reference to the A477, which is the trunk road that links St Clears with the Port of Pembroke, which is the ferry terminal to the Irish Republic. So I think that needs to be referenced in there. The A487, which is a trunk road as well up to Ceredigion, doesn't get a reference. And I know this is kind of, we're looking at east-west, but I do think there's a kind of an interplay with our northern neighbours in that as well. No reference to the Traws Cymru bus services, which are quite important in Pembrokeshire. And if we're talking about how we develop bus services in the future, I think from Carmarthen, Haverfordwest, Fishguard and Cardigan, they're quite important too. On page 16, there's lots of talk around economic well-being, equity of accessibility. I think there should be a reference in there about tackling poverty. It's a massive issue. We had a summit on it in Pembrokeshire yesterday, but in terms of economic well-being, if you can't access a job because you're unable to afford that transport, I think the transport plan should be looking at that, and it should be stating that specifically. And also on page 16 about developing how we develop the nighttime economy, particularly in relation to tourism. So we have lots of bus services that run around between 9 and 5, nothing into the evening, and there's no mention of that in this scoping paper. So I think that should be something that should be mentioned at least. And also something around, so we've got mentions of ports, which is great, but the viability of those ports, so particularly when it comes to Fishguard and Pembroke, they've seen a huge reduction in freight since Brexit. There's no mention of the impact of what Brexit may do to those ports in terms of the volumes of freight traffic there, and the long-term viability of those ports. So, you know, Fishguard has had no ferry service operating out of it since the start of January. There's a very limited passenger service operating out of Pembroke Dock at the moment as well. And against the backdrop of multi-million euro investment into Rosslare, our ports are particularly vulnerable against that backdrop. And I think there is still a rail freight service to Milford Haven, which isn't picked up in the report as well. So I think that's quite important because, you know, there are still several freight services running into Milford Haven, but that's not there either. And this might be a political hot potato, but there is lots of discussion around, you know, reopening of a rail line between Carmarthen and Aberystwyth. And there's nothing mentioned in that or around that potential opportunity for tourism. And I just wondered why that might be the case. Sorry, there was a lot there.
No, that's fine. You were very patient as well, Councillor Turney. Thank you. So I'm not sure who wants to pick on that, Stuart.
Yeah, if I start certainly in detail, the kind of case for change won't cover all the detail. Absolutely. I mean, it would be, to be honest, if it was to cover all the detail, it would be the RTP. So there's going to be a kind of massive amount of development. You're absolutely right to point out some of the things on there. What the next stage is very much going to consultation to go to all the sort of groups and say, you know, what things are important. I mean, you know, there's some really interesting things just in the case of change about the kind of level of, I guess, car-borne transport from a tourism perspective and things. Is, you know, there's some, you know, it's almost to say these are the gaps, or this is a summary of some of the gaps, but we've got to do a lot more digging down, and we've got to go into a lot of detail in the development of it. And I guess that's part of the concern. From an officer perspective, we feel we need to have the right amount of time to sort of do that effective consultation, make sure we have a kind of a robust investigation, because you know, it's not just about how people move about at the moment and making it slightly better. You know, things you pointed out about tackling poverty. What this needs to be is the transport's not just there because people want to do it. It's the way that we can enable economic viability, that we can sort of improve the economy and the performance. You know, there's some good you know, outland maps in the area which show the sort of you know, the economic challenges that we've got in the area. And what we want the RTP to be is a way of saying, you know, we need to tackle these in order to give us a stronger chance of having a stronger economy, which then links to health benefits, the opportunities, the everything else it opens up. So yes, not everything will be in there, but I know Darren's indicating whether Lee's got any comments or whoever on there. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Darren, did you want to come in again?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Yeah, those are very useful points that you've raised. Thank you. I mean, I'm kind of repeating a little bit of Stuart to start with. So, I mean, the case for change is a kind of very high-level strategic document. So it wouldn't have and didn't capture that level of detail because it will be picked up as we move through the process in a bit more detail, but that doesn't detract from the usefulness of you raising that now. So things like the trunk road stuff that you mentioned at the moment, those sort of things are picked up in some of the very kind of high level mapping that you've seen in the document. So it shows all the strategic routes, but it's only on a plan, you know. There is a reference in the documentation quite high level and strategically about the importance of the ports for Milford Haven and Fishguard. So there is that need, and the same with some of the bus things. It doesn't mention Trowse Cymru, but it refers to the network development needed around buses, which will feed into the more detailed plan production work. So again, it's very helpful that you've raised that, and we will be we'll pick that up obviously as part of this feedback today and feed it into the more detailed production. We haven't at the moment answered your question about the rail link in Carmarthenshire because I'm less familiar with that. So I hope some other colleagues will answer that one. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Darren. There's a couple of officers have raised hands, so I'll go to them. But I think Lee, you've put your hand up first. Do you want to come in? Are you on mute? You're mute.
Apologies, Chair. Thank you. Just to note that I've took a copious note of Council Attorney's observations there, and clearly, obviously, I will engage with the officers about including as much as we possibly can, subject to that strategic detail that we've talked about there. I think it's for others to comment on the Carmarthen rail line. Obviously, there's been a number of studies undertaken over the years, and clearly that will be part of the evidence base for the actual transport plan when we get into the detail of that. So I think it is important that we actually pick up that wider perspective beyond transport as well, and I think that's where the document is aiming in terms of this. I think it's fair to say the guidance and Neath is very transport orientated, a little bit around the environment, but actually we do need to, I think, move the scope beyond that to cover some of Councillor Tierney's and indeed Councillor Black's points as well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. David, I think you were next.
Well, I think Councillor Howlett has had his hand up for a little while, Chair. So perhaps you'd like
I think
Councillor Howlett to come in.
I would, but I think he has a separate question. If
Oh,
that
right,
right, Councillor
okay.
Howlett. So I think if we can just go work through this. Thank you, Councillor Howlett, for confirming that. If we could work through this, I assure you, I'm not ignoring my
Okay.
fellow member.
No, I didn't want to overstep the mark, Chair. That's all. Right. I just wanted to pick up really on the Trunk Road and Traws Cymru bus network. Obviously, they're very much driven and controlled by Welsh Government. They'll be key in inputting to the regional transport plan in both of those respects. But I wanted to pick up really on the transport poverty element, really. And I guess that links with the nighttime economy really as well, because we're obviously now going to be moving from next year, from April the 1st, into a new sort of bus contract arrangement that you'll all be familiar with. But more importantly, we'll have an opportunity, I believe, through the franchising arrangements to try and expand those services, or certainly do the gap analysis where we believe services need to be added to the network, and that's early morning, late evening, so that people without cars and access to other transport will be able to rely upon those services. I know that within my own authority, there's 50% of people don't have access to a vehicle or car for transport, so they are wholly and solely reliant upon bus transport. So we hope to make inroads through the franchising arrangements to see if we can close those gaps out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Thank you. And with if I could bring Simon in now, because I think you wanted to follow up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just picking up on a couple of those points raised previously. Yeah, certainly in terms of the poverty question that was raised and the observation made, the intention with the plan is to develop a balanced transport plan which looks at social, economic and environmental. Obviously, there's a significant focus within the Llwybr Newydd on the environmental impacts and benefits associated with an effective transport plan. But it is a fair point and a good point to make, and it's something that we'll need to reflect as the plan is developed. Aside from that as well, the plan will need to be used as a means of focusing future funding decisions. So anything that we include in there moving forward will have to be balanced against realistic funding levels, and also used as a means to perhaps influence revenue decisions which are made in terms of future bus support grants, etc. There was a specific point with regards to the Carmarthen to Aberystwyth railway line and reopening of that. As Lee mentioned, there have been some studies done in recent years to look at the feasibility and viability of that. It's certainly something we'll take back for further consideration once we get into more granular detail associated with development of the plan. As I mentioned, what comes out of the plan in terms of recommendations needs to be balanced against a realistic future operating budget and deliverability, etc. But that said, it doesn't make it any less relevant. What does need to be considered is the fact that obviously rail, the legislation, the operation, the funding of rail, and decisions associated with that are done at a national level, and they're not sort of devolved to regional or local authority level. So all what we set out will need to reflect what's in the PSOC for that has been developed by Transport for Wales in terms of setting out the rail priorities, because that in turn will influence where funding decisions are made in the future. But it's a good point nonetheless. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon, and thanks for your patience. Oh, thank you, Mark. I think that covers everything you've raised there. So we'll go on to Councillor Howlett, who's been very patient. If you'd like to come in now.
Yeah, thank you very much. No problem. Thank you for the previous contributors. Yeah, I'd stay to start that obviously no one would argue about we're against better public transport. That has a huge number of benefits. The thing that concerns me on this report, on page 9 of the agenda pack, page 2 of the report, the 4 priorities there in the middle section: private motor vehicles, lowest priority. Now, I think that we've got to realise that across the region, as David just mentioned, we've got a huge range of sort of differences. David mentioned, I think 50% of people in Neath, Talbot don't have access to a private property. Now, if you look at private vehicles, if you look at page 12 and the from the 2021 census, the percentage of the population with no car or van access. If you look at large swathes of Pembrokeshire and indeed Carmarthenshire, that's less than 10%. Now, I know it's a chicken and egg situation, and you've got to encourage people to get out of cars into public transport, but I think the reality is, for much of rural and Pembrokeshire, and I would suggest Carmarthenshire, although I don't know it so well, that unless you're going to have a fleet of transport just going around the counties all the time, you're always going to need road transport, private vehicles, hopefully electric vehicles or hydrogen. But I just feel that, I think it would be wrong of me just to sit here and say nothing when there's a huge difference in what probably the priorities of this sort of plan should be. So I'd like that to be noted, please. And the other thing when I'm speaking in terms of train transport in West Wales, we often find, for various reasons, when train services are cancelled, that it's often the extremities that suffer most. And we, I think, have had a number of times when a lot of trains have been cancelled, and I think you've got to give people the confidence, if they want to use public transport, that trains or buses or whatever it may be will turn up at the appropriate time and take you within a reasonable time frame to your destination. If you've not got that confidence, I think you're on a sticky wicket from the start, basically. So I'd just like to highlight my concerns about the reliability of public transport, and especially in the extremities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howlett. I see you've got your hand raised. Darren, would you like to come back to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in first, and then if my colleagues want to add anything. So the reason why the plan is written in the way it is, with motor vehicles as the lowest priority, in that sense, on the page 2 of the plan, of the case for change, is that reflects the strategic priorities from Welsh Government in terms of Llwybr Newydd. So, we kind of, in terms of the case for change, we were just sort of reflecting that, because it would then have been out of kilter with regards to the sort of high level strategic side of things. Now, the wider discussion around Llwybyr Newydd and the prioritisation of private motor vehicle, you know, could take a lot of time to discuss, and is maybe get quite political, I would have guessed, in terms of people's view of that, of why private motor vehicles are the lowest priority. I do take the point, Councillor Howlett, obviously in terms of a rural area like Pembrokeshire and other parts of the region, that private motor vehicle will still be very important. But I think in terms of a transport plan, and of course the prioritisation from Welsh Government's point of view of putting motor vehicles lowest, this links back to, you know, the sort of climate change and decarbonisation side of things, and trying to come away from that sort of carbon-based private motor vehicle currently. I know it's going to be going towards electric and everything else, but there's a long way to go. So you know, prioritising walking, cycling, public transport is trying to be part of that journey. I feel like I'm representing Welsh Government there. I'm just repeating what they put in the you know, in their view in terms of Llwybyr Newydd. So I'm not trying to defend them. I'm just saying why it ended up in that particular case, in our case for change. So I think I know where you're coming from. Makes a lot of sense, but in terms of our case for change and plan and a strategic transport plan, we're trying to reflect the national priorities. If they change, because they are changed by the politicians in charge, then obviously the case for change would reflect that, wouldn't it? Clearly. The other point about train transport, and particularly in West Wales, that's more of an immediate issue rather than a strategic issue, dare I say. It's happening now. It's a problem now. It needs to be forming part of the strategic case in terms of rail improvement. So we have been doing some work with some of the local transport user groups and with TfW to raise our concerns about the number of train cancellations and the rail replacement, or even sometimes lack of rail replacement. Of course, their feedback is it's all linked with bringing in the new fleet of trains, and it'll be all wonderful and lovely when everything is in place and sorted out. But that's not much comfort for rail passengers now, and it's breeding a sense of lack of confidence in the system as a result. So we are trying to change that and draw those issues, not just Pembrokeshire, but user groups and other people. It is quite difficult, if I'm being honest, Councillor Howard, at the moment. The other thing about the rail, it's not just reliability, it's availability, and that's where the strategic stuff comes in, about increasing the frequency of trains as well, so that passengers, as well as the reliable side of it, that there will be a train when they want it to go, and that does feed into the regional transport planning process. I hope that helps. Thanks.
Thank you, Darren. Stuart, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just briefly, you know, it's very valid points, Councillor Howlett, about there, and I think this is the really important thing, that it's not a one-size-fits-all. The solutions in terms of, from a transport perspective for city centres, are very different to rural areas, and you know, it's very clear that this is not about sort of prohibiting the you know, private car as a solution in terms of some of those, you know, in a lot of those rural areas where alternatives, viable alternatives are just not there. They would be, you know, way too costly and wouldn't work. But I think what we've got here is just having the mechanism that we can seek the right sort of investment for the interventions that can address the majority of the sort of needs, but without forgetting about the needs and the challenges of the rural area, where, you know, the dependency on, you know, private motor car is definitely there, and, you know, as a result, then the costs of ownership and the cost of running and things also sit there as well, which is a real challenge. But, you know, hopefully, you know, what we'll be trying to do is take that guidance and say, okay, this is the flavour of it. This is the sort of, you know, the strategic direction. But you've got to bear in mind that this isn't sort of just the centre of Cardiff or whatever that you know, that are, you know, this is a very different, a very sort of dispersed, you know, region with very rural areas and then some urban areas. But some of those urban areas, as Dave mentioned, you know, car ownership there is very low and challenging and things on there. So, yeah, it's about trying to get the right types of solution they offer. But as well, I think, as been touched on, it's making sure it's one thing to have the focus on sustainability, which I absolutely agree with. But what we've also got, we've got some significant economic challenges in the area, and we want this to be a plan which also helps address that as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. I've unfortunately, Councillor Percy wasn't able to attend today, but he has asked me, and I'm happy to ask on his behalf. If you might bear with me, the bus data is from before the collapse of services last year and doesn't reflect the current state of play. Many areas outside of the city do not have access to services that can get them to work and home on time for traditional 9 to 5 without looking at shift workers who have wider needs. This includes some very built up urban areas, and this need should be identified clearly when looking at the case for change, as early and evening services are essential for modal shift. Linked to this is frequency, and the traditional hourly service, as referred to in the plan, is not sufficiently ambitious for modal shift, with services needing to be far more frequent, even where there is currently a good regular daytime service. So those were Councillor Percy's comments, and obviously from an urban environment. Would anyone like to respond to that? Thank you, Stuart.
I'll have an initial comment, but yeah, fully agree. And it's back to that thing. It's about really understanding the gaps, not just of the services that are provided at the moment, but where there's the opportunity to grow and expand. And I know Dave touched on it earlier when he mentioned about franchising, and that's a big part of the work that we'll be doing. Set the framework in place through the regional transport plan, but working with Transport for Wales. And certainly one benefit is we're starting to get some quite rich bus data through at the moment about what's working, what's not working, where the gaps are, where the delays are in the services. And I think with sort of effective consultation with the community through the RTP process and through developing the bus strategies, we've got the opportunity to try and build better networks that can provide a more suitable service for more people. And I think that's the challenge. But I don't know, others may have a comment as well.
That's lovely. Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, just as an observation, I think the Carmarthen to Aberystwyth bus link that now is in place, which is using electric buses as well, not any sort of hydrogen model, but simple EV model, which seems to be working very effectively. Something as simple as that is hopefully a model for how services can evolve once we're into the next stage. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stuart. I know he hasn't got his hand up, but Councillor Bowen was wanting to ask about something. Did you want to come in now, Councillor Bowen?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think most of the questions have been answered in what I was going to say, but it's just back on the EV, the stations going up. I think this has been discussed on most committees now, whether Swansea Bay or this one itself within the councils. So it seems, we're all trying to work on the same page to try and get these infrastructures put in.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bowen. Stuart, do you want to come back?
Yeah, it very much is a focus, and I know the point I was going to come back in after Councillor Black mentioned with the getting the right EV charging infrastructure. I guess the hope is as battery technology improves, the range improves, and the need to charge as frequently will sort of reduce as well. There are some specific challenges with charging, and I know Councillor Black mentioned with terraced houses and things. It's almost there that the issue of the technology or the type of where you plug in, how you cross the highway is the smallest issue. The largest issue is that parking, the sort of effectively the ownership of the parking space, which becomes particularly challenging in terms of if you provide infrastructure there for people, then suddenly it's not just anyone can park there. It suddenly becomes the person with the need to charge there expects to then charge there. So there are some of the kind of, I guess, social challenges associated with it. So, but yeah, getting the infrastructure right and the technology will move at a pace with EV charging. Because it was mentioned about the overnight charging, which is certainly one thing that we're looking into to look at how we get cheaper electric. But I know that there are also the opportunity to use sort of vehicles that are basically electric vehicles as basically power banks as well, from a reverse charging perspective. To, if they're not being used, then they can be used to sort of help with surge demand and supply electric from those. So as technology will emerge, I think things will certainly advance at a pace with it. So I'm just trying to keep a handle on it all the way along. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's just going to be the biggest challenge for any local authority where, you know, homeowners have got 2-3 cars. They, you know, they want to park outside their own houses, and you know, this is going to be, like Dave knows, you know, it's a big discussion with Neath and Talbot at the moment, which we're going to try and allow people to run over our paths and so forth. And you know, when people got so many cars out at the home now, it's going to be a major challenge for everybody, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Thank you. Darren, I saw you had your hand up as well to come in on this.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose a couple of things, just on the point that Councillor Bowen raised. To date, our thinking in Pembrokeshire had been, and it is changing, that we've developed quite an extensive off-street parking network of EV charging on the basis that that gives plenty of opportunity for people who don't have off-street parking, private off-street parking. They could go to a car park and charge up. That's the theory. I know in practice that many people wouldn't necessarily want to do that. There are issues with tradesmen who've got tools in vans and all that sort of thing. So we've also been considering things like area charging points on housing estates, so that, you know, it makes it a bit more localized. But some of these ideas are embryonic. But I think obviously the on-street charging points outside people's houses is probably where things are heading as well. So there's a few solutions. But the main point I wanted to mention, Chair, was talking about electric, fair enough, and that's going to have a place, obviously, but not to forget hydrogen. And I mention that again, perhaps being parochial from Pembrokeshire, but I am aware that there's quite a lot of work going on in the Swansea Bay area with projects with hydrogen as well. But, you know, we should see in Pembrokeshire 3 major producers of hydrogen coming online from about 2027. Once there's hydrogen in mass, then we should start to see the price being quite favourable. Yes, at the moment, vehicle purchase price and availability is a big issue. But we've seen, as I understand it, TfW have placed a large order for hydrogen buses further east. So they've clearly got a mind on hydrogen as well. So hydrogen for the larger vehicles, we see it perhaps in our area more for the waste freighters, the highways, lorries, larger vehicles, not the smaller fleets. So there's some way to go, but hydrogen will feature, I think, as part of the strategy for the way forward. And the other thing to mention that's happening with us as well, I'm sure it's happening with other authorities, is use of HVO. So replacement diesel, and we are now using that on our fleet, and that seems to be pretty effective as well. So there are other alternatives as well. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. I think that's an important point. And, you know, obviously the International Energy Agency, I think they put down hydrogen as being part of about 16% of the future anticipated use, and exactly as you've said, for larger vehicles, that it's envisaged to be a key part of the overall development, and I completely acknowledge that. And thank you. That's a valid point, especially for coming from an area where it's going to be such a vital part of the development in Milford Haven and in Neath Talbot as well. So thank you for raising that, Darren. I think Councillor Black, would you like to come in next? Your hand's the next one on the list.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to come back, and Stuart has hit the nail on the head in terms of being able to park. I mean, if I have a petrol car, I can go to a petrol station, I can fill it up in 5 minutes, drive back home and leave it there. If I go to a charging point, you've got to leave it there for 20 minutes, half an hour, I don't know how long, and people don't want that inconvenience. And I think the issue in terms of on-street parking, you have to be able to park. Again, massive terraced area where I live, I often can't park in my own street, and this is going to be a big issue. I think it's going to create a ceiling in terms of the rollout of EV cars. And unless they change the design, I mean, ideally, you should be able to take the battery out of the car, take it into your home, charge it, and then put it back in the car. And I think that's the sort of design change which is actually going to get EV cars above that ceiling. Just some thoughts, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Black. David, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to pick up on what Darren said about the the hydrogen infrastructure. Of course, we have to take into account the supply of hydrogen vehicles. At our authority, our waste manager did trial a hydrogen refuse freighter. So we've piloted that, but they're not readily available in the market and still really developing the technology around it. In terms of our own fleet, we obviously we need to be reliant upon that secure source of hydrogen. And as Darren said, that's going to be beyond 2027 and up to 2030. So that's the sort of timeline in terms of fleet renewal. We're looking at hydrogen vehicles. And just picking up on the EV, it's not all clear sailing. As we've experienced that even on small vans, where we have building services and materials that need to be transported about, that the vans can't take the payload, i.e. the batteries haven't got enough capacity to get those vehicles around the county. So it's not the single answer, is what I'm saying, in terms of EV for certain parts of our fleet. So it is a developing technology, and we'll have to spec vehicles that are going to be able to deliver the services that are required. So just to bear that in mind, that the electric's not the only answer, and clearly there will be a much greater transition with hydrogen in future years as well.
Thank you, David. That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, hopefully, it's beyond maybe this initial scoping document, but that partners like the Royal Mail and certainly the depot in Carmarthen, they use for all of their delivery vehicles now they're using EVs. I think they've still got 2 diesel vehicles, but the rest of it is electric. And like with the Aberystwyth Carmarthen bus link as well, I think we're seeing the industry develop very quickly, and cars. And the other thing is prices are coming down as well. Secondhand EVs are a lot more affordable than they were only a few years ago, and the batteries are lasting a long time. So that it's a clean and simple technology, which is going to help us decarbonize, which I guess is where this whole strategies come from, as was alluded to earlier. So very interesting. I had a question, if I may, because I don't see any other hands up. I was very pleased to see the addendum come through, the new appendix, with the railway data not being just from Swansea. I think, and has been discussed by Councillor Turney's comments and Councillor Howlett, that the region is a bit wider than just Swansea, although we all enjoy going to Swansea. It's not the only place people want to go. We travel east from Swansea, and certainly in terms of railway, I'm interested to make sure that things like the Verlinda Parkway are considered. In terms of improving the speed of journeys, reducing the journey times, because it adds a lot to go into Swansea and then come out of it again when we could be doing things a bit quicker. As I say, not that everybody doesn't want to go to Swansea. It's where I did my degree, so I love Swansea. It's a great place. And also, just a similar point that maybe you could come in on is just that my concern over investment. And traditionally, investment models tend to be on population density, and that doesn't favour Pembrokeshire or Carmarthenshire. And I'd just like some reassurance that this overall plan isn't going to just look at pouring investment into the urban areas, and that the wider region is going to have some support to address some of the issues that members and officers have mentioned this afternoon.
Hi,
Thank you,
Chair.
Stuart.
Sorry to disturb you. Well, Councillor John have had his hand up for quite a while at the moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Councillor Bowen. I hadn't seen that. Would you like to come in, Councillor John?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and apologies for being late onto the call. I had another meeting which I didn't. It overlapped, so I might have missed. Well, I have missed a lot of what's been said. So if anything I mentioned now has been said, please just stop me. But since I came on, there's been quite a bit of talk, quite rightly, about charging for EVs in streets and that sort of thing, which would be a problem, obviously, everywhere. But it was mentioned earlier that number one priority is the walking and cycling as being the highest, and trying to encourage people. Now, appreciating a lot of this report is on strategic routes and buses, trains, etc. On page 3 of the report, page 10, it does say that the transport network in the region comprises some local routes for pedestrians, cyclists, etc., to provide accesses, villages, towns, to school shops. I know in my area, a lot of people would be more inclined to walk or cycle if there were any safe routes. I cover 3 villages, which are all separated by a mile or 2 between them. There's no safe routes between either of them. You take your life in your hands walking. So whereas a lot of the investment, as you just said, will go to the bigger urban areas, it does need a bigger investment rurally in walking and cycling routes to encourage people to want to do that. In doing that, you would reduce cars rurally. I mean, people are very, very happy to have more of a sort of a healthy lifestyle if they could do it safely. It also says in the next paragraph about subsidised buses with the on-demand service. Well, that's just been introduced in the area I cover as well, and the feedback I've had is it's very, very good if you can get it booked. That is the second issue. It leads to a lot more investment in that, because there could be a tipping point where you've got enough services where people then start saying, hang on, it is more convenient to use this public transport or to walk or to cycle rather than take the car, even for short trips. I mean, sometimes I go into County Hall for meetings and I'll go down the road and catch the bus because the time is convenient to do it. But if people had to do it at a different time, it's just not convenient. So it's a lot of investment needed in those options, which are the highest priorities really, 1 and 2. A lot of investment needed, as you just said, rurally as well as urban areas. So they were comments really, and if that has been brushed on, I apologise for duplicating, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to come in.
Thank you, Councillor John. I think the only thing possibly that you missed was that the level of detail in this report is more of a scoping document, and that was discussed at the beginning. All of these areas are very important, as you've highlighted. I completely agree. But Darren, would you like to? Would anyone who would like to answer, Councillor John?
No, I can come in on a few things. So your point, well made point about making sure that it is seen as a regional plan and not, for want of a better word, a Swansea plan. Sorry, you didn't say that, but I'm just summarising. Well, I think that's fully understood. I think there are a number of safeguards. You've clearly got the 4 chief officers around the table representing their individual authority interests. You've got your cabinet members as well in the CJC transport subgroup who are representing their individual authority interests as well. And then obviously above that you've got the leaders. And we've got the scrutiny group as well who are calling this into account as well. So I think yes, there's some way to go, but there's plenty of opportunity at all those levels to make sure that those interests are spread out and understood across the whole region. Clearly there will be some views taken, I suspect, probably from Welsh Government level about priorities of spend, but then that's for us to then work through that and understand how that affects us in the region and make sure it is suitable for us. And just to be clear, what I meant by that was it wasn't a coded answer. But if you think of rail, there's discussions going on about the Swansea Bay Metro, and there's discussions going on about the links into West Wales for improved rail links. So there's 2 strategic sort of ideas about rail, and then there was the other idea mentioned about the link north-south from Carmarthen as well, which has been mentioned and something we need to think about. So all of those have got to be considered and prioritised. That's the sort of thing I meant. Councillor John, thank you. I mean, we can't disagree with you. Yes, we need to invest in walking and cycling. At the current time, there's opportunity to bid into for funding, and we're doing a lot of work on that locally. There are 1 or 2 schemes in your patch as well, don't forget. So we've done a little bit of investment in your patch, and we need to do more, I agree. And hopefully the plan, which is, I think Stuart mentioned earlier, the plan is the thing for us then to tag on for the actually building up a delivery plan around it then. So we'll be able to bid into schemes based on the strategic plan into the delivery plan. And transport demand is really interesting, needs to be managed, agreed, of course. Quite positive that you mentioned, that we will need to manage transport demand if this is all successful. There will be shift in mode, and therefore we'll be managing transport demand, hopefully. Thank you very much for your points.
Thank you, Darren. That's a very helpful answer. Councillor John, did you want to come back? You still got your hand raised.
No, sorry, I haven't dropped it. I'll do it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Stuart, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just briefly. Yeah, that's a very good point Councillor John made, really, in terms of that active travel. There has been a lot of investment. It looks like there'll continue to be that investment, obviously from a sustainability perspective, absolutely, but also from the health perspective as well, which is a reason for the strong part of the focus from Welsh Government on there, rather than I guess the routes always seemingly being compromised for sort of pedestrians and for cyclists, is to try and give a much higher level of priority so that people become a lot more comfortable, and probably the wrong term, but it's more normalized that people kind of, hop on a bike or walk to places, rather than it being seen as a little bit odd in some situations. So very much trying to get the investment to tackle those issues. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. I agree. And obviously the only other thing with active travel infrastructure is making sure there's somewhere to park your bike wherever you're going to, right, as well, and charge it. There's another charging issue. But thank you, Stuart, very helpful. David?
Yes, just to note, Councillor John hit the nail on the head, really, with some of the comments he made about the rural aspects, and the plan really needs something that for everyone. But I'd also say that as members, we'd like your support in lobbying for a bigger sector share to local authorities to undertake investment. And in that regard, the setting of policy at Welsh Government level, I think members can influence that, and how that funding can be prioritised. So taking Councillor John's example, what we find under active travel is that there's what they call prioritisation models, whereby the investment will go for to be spent the biggest bang for your buck in terms of modal shift. Now, although I accept that, and you can't argue against the sort of economic approach to that, but it's really important that rural communities also get some investment to make their lives better in terms of the transport poverty that we talked about earlier. So it's a plea, I guess, that as champions for transport, that we continue to lobby for our sector share of Welsh Government and national funding as well.
Okay, thank you, David. That's very helpful. And just one observation I'd make, just based on Darren's comments, is I think it is very welcome from as myself as chair, that the data, the transport data, the railway data has been amended in this, so that it includes transport beyond Swansea. I'm not trying to suggest that it was a Swansea plan, but that the two things, Swansea Metro and improved journey times from the region, are both objectives that we can work to. So I think that's welcome, certainly by me and hopefully by the rest of the committee. So thank you for that. Stuart?
Yeah, just that reassurance, really, that it certainly wasn't intended to be the Swansea's the only important thing. The journeys were just meant to show a flavour of how dispersed the sort of patterns of travel are across the region. But more than happy, and it was a good addition suggested by Councillor Price to have those other stations in terms of across the across the rest of the region, just showing where people, the chunks of people are travelling to. So yeah, I can give that absolute assurance. What we want is a plan that is robust for the region, because it has to be so that the whole region flourishes, really, and that's what it's got to support. So thank you.
Good, thank you very much. I don't see any other hands up, so I think we'll note this item and thank everyone for their time. Agenda item 4 is urgent items, and you'll be pleased to know that are none. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time and patience this afternoon and the meeting and the feedback and comments. I look forward to seeing you all again soon, and I'll close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Speak to you all again. Thank you.